Well, good afternoon and welcome to Facebook Live, which is live from the SETI Institute in downtown Mountain View, California. I have two very special guests here at the moment. Sitting to my left is Nathalie Cabrol, who's the director of the Carl Sagan Center for Research. And also to my left, I have Rebecca McDonald, who's the director of communications here at the Institute. And we're going to talk a little about looking for life. Now, you think if you were going to really go and find some life, where you go to would be the sort of Amazon jungle or under the oceans. But these guys are not going there. Tell me, where are you going to look for life?
Well, Rebecca, that will be your first time in the Indies?
It will be, indeed. I've never been to South America before.
And this is where we are going, and I am not meaning to be rude here, but I am trying to forward this to Planetary Landscapes. Okay. I will be with you in a moment, otherwise I will hear from it.
So I can tell you that we'll be going to the Atacama Desert in Chile, which is known as one of the driest places on Earth. Very, very dry environment, very, very high UV environment, very what we think of as an extreme environment, one where you wouldn't typically find a lot of life teeming about, or so you would think.
Okay. And you mentioned UV, ultraviolet radiation, that gives you suntan, sunburn, or something worse if there's a lot of it. Why is there a lot of that in the Atacama Desert? I mean, obviously it's a desert, so it's sunny, but what else does the Atacama have?
Well, Natalie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess it's because it's an extremely high altitude as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Atacama itself, actually, this is interesting because the Atacama itself is high but not fairly high. It starts from right behind the coast, really Chile, Peru, and they are nested around the coast. These are very long country, a little bit like California, you know, narrow banded. And then you have the coastal range. It's 800 meters. And after that, the Atacama starts, and it goes on for a couple of 100 kilometers with a steady gain in elevation. And then you are reaching the Altiplano, which is 4,200, between 38 and 4,200 meters, which is in the range of 14,000 to 15,000. Okay. So after that, you know, you are in the Altiplano. You are not technically in the Atacama anymore, but it's a barren desert. The Altiplano starts to be a little bit wetter because of the springs and the volcanoes, etc. But yes, the UV is extremely strong even in the Atacama, and there are a number of reasons for that.
Okay. So you're very high up, you're in a desert. It must be at that altitude tricky to breathe. How much acclimatization do you need for that?
Well, technically, when you're in the mountain, it's 300 meters per day. Depends, you know, if you have been there before or if you are going there for the first time. So, Rebecca, welcome. There are a number of steps that you can take, you know, to avoid problems. And some of them are simply take your time, which is always the best. And now there are also some drugs that you can use, you know, that are specialized for altitude and helping you process better CO2 and oxygen.
Okay, and something for the headaches as well.
Well, that's part of it. That's part of it.
Okay, so I now imagine you two clambering through this desert, but there's more than you two going, isn't there? Tell us about this expedition, because it is a real expedition, which is so exciting.
You tell me. On and on. It's an expedition all way around, you know, the preparation and everything that goes with it. But in terms of the team, this is, as of today, the largest team ever for me.
Oh, wow.
And we will be 34.
34 people.
34 or 38. It's between that. 24 scientists at any time. And then the rest of the team is logistics, because you need to move around and you need to be able to focus on the science that you want to do, really.
Yeah, okay. So you're going to fly in, this is next week when you're heading out. So you fly into Santiago, do you? Or, and then you head into the hills. How does that work?
So I think we do fly to Santiago, but then we immediately make a transfer to Antofagasta. Okay. Which is where we sort of start, where we meet the rest of the team, gather our wits about us, and then the next day we head up to a place called Salar de Pajonales.
Yeah, that will be a couple of days later. In fact, we have a day of logistics in Antofagasta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just give the team to congregate
Yes.
in Antofagasta.
Yeah.
And join the logistics team. In fact, the logistics team will be leaving on the 17th. You were mentioning a day ahead of us, and start preparing camp. So yeah, Salar de Paronales is an amazing, absolutely amazing place. It's stunning.
Okay. So what are you going to be looking for, or what are you going to be measuring when you get into the Atacama, into this incredibly dry region, and what use is that?
Well, so to talk about the project, it is a project that was funded by the NASA Astrobiology Institute. So when you talk about astrobiology, it's obviously related to the search for life in the universe. Particularly here, it's related to the search for life in the solar system. And our project was more tuned towards Mars 2020, and ExoMars. But some of the guiding principles of the findings that we are making are really, you can use them for the solar system in general. Yes. It's about how do you identify, how do you detect and characterize biosignatures. Of course, the bias right now is that, well, it's life as we know it, obviously, but it makes sense for Mars, we know that. So what we are doing, we are going to places that we call terrestrial analogs for planetary environment. This is a very good place. Salar de Paronales and the three other sites where we will be going are very good analogs to early Mars. And there we are learning in an extreme desert environment where life is scarce and where it has definitely very different patterns as more complex life that you see everywhere. We learn how to recognize those patterns, and we know how to integrate the different scales and the different resolution to use the data that we have from orbit to guide asset on the ground. And so what the rovers will be doing in 2020, our team is doing it using drones that are simulating orbiting images, etc., and taking images of the sites on the ground, and then guiding the science team. And then the science team is doing ground truth.
Okay. If you do have any questions and you want to ask Nathalie or Rebecca anything about their expedition, please do drop a text or drop a message rather to the Facebook page, and we'll get around to those questions in a little bit. So the Atacama, it's like Mars, sort of. So how does it?
It's a wet
similar?
Mars.
It's a wet
Can you
Mars.
imagine? Can you imagine?
So the driest place on Earth is a wet Mars. Okay, yes, yeah. So obviously there are some differences. The atmosphere is different. So what are the key similarities and the key differences as you try to simulate an exploration of Mars, which obviously we have to do remotely at the moment?
Yes, and you're bringing up a very good point, because you can do a research in terrestrial analogs in many different ways. You can go about one very specific analog. For instance, if you want to understand how life could survive in the ices of the polar caps on Mars or on Europa or Enceladus, etc., you might want to pick an area that has ice, and only that. If you want to understand what type of environment life was in when it started, then you need an environmental analog, and it's not only one thing. You need to have an assemblage of variables that are matching what you're doing. Obviously, the terrestrial atmosphere right now has nothing to do with what it was 3.5 billion years ago, 4 billion years ago. At the time, Mars, the Earth, and Venus had the same type of atmosphere, 95% CO2. But then they diverged very, very quickly, and we had a lot of oxygen in our atmosphere. So that stays different. Although there was maybe a little bit more oxygen in the Martian atmosphere earlier on, it's not the case anymore. So, but for everything else, as far as geology, mineralogy, UV environment, and composition of rocks, chemistry of rocks, the Atacama is very much a match for what we see from IRISE and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. You are finding the same kind of chemicals like perchlorate, and for the same reasons, because you have ancient salars, well, lakes that are drying out, and then minerals being exposed to very high UV. So then you are developing this typical chemistry. So there we are learning what's happening to life components. Where does life find refuge in this type of environment? Where can we find it? What are the patterns of life, of microbial life?
Okay, so if you find life hiding under rocks, and we'll come back to that in a minute, here the chances are, if you're used in the analog, that you want to peek under rocks when you go to Mars or that sort of thing. I mean, that's a very crude way of putting it.
Yeah, it's sort of. And the thing is that on Earth, you still have today a thick atmosphere where you have an ozone layer. And so some of the UV radiation, some of the wavelengths are still not penetrating our atmosphere, whereas they are penetrating on Mars. On Earth, we do have a range of ultraviolet. You have UVA, you have UVB, and you have PAR. PAR is the good stuff. This is the stuff that makes your leaves go green. They like that. They transform all of that. They use the CO2. They transform into oxygen, etc. But then you have UVA and UVB, and those are not as good. Those are going to get your DNA in trouble. And so on Earth, you are being protected by the atmosphere. And you are less protected as you are going high up. And now you understand why we are going high up, because we need to actually understand how life adapts to these kind of changes, because as you go up, you have less atmosphere. In the tropics, you have also in that region a lot less ozone, just because the Van Allen, the radiation belt of the Earth, is re-entering, and so we have less protection. So all of this is creating an environment where we can understand what happens to life. And interestingly enough, very primitive organisms that are very similar to what we found on Earth 3.5 billion years ago, well, they adapt. They don't seem to have a problem. They are creating pigment. They are finding places where you would expect, there would be no life out there. That was the first thing that I realized when the first year of the project, not this project, but 15 years ago when I started in the Andes. I went there with my dosimeter and I say, it's going to be so nasty, nothing's going to be around.
Nothing wants to hang around here, yeah.
And then the very first morning, I had to sit on a rock, look around, there were stromatolites everywhere and algae everywhere, and I say, oh boy, do we start. So 15 years later, we are, barely scratching the surface, literally. But this is teaching us a lot. First, about the resilience of life on Earth and its capability for adaptation. But then also how to search, or what, where, how to search for life elsewhere.
Yeah. Now, if Rebecca, for the first time up there, goes into the desert, you're not going to sort of see a lizard or a giraffe or say, oh, there's some life. This is much more subtle life you're finding, and this is the type of life that would have been around in a very early Earth and in a wetter Mars 3.5 billion years ago. So you're not looking for big life, are you? You're looking for little life.
Oh yeah, no, we are looking for something that is extremely small. We are looking for bacteria. We are looking for, what we call the blue and green algae. So these are what you found in ponds everywhere on Earth. And the incredible thing is that they are pretty much exactly the same as they were 4 billion years, 3.8 billion years ago when we have the first record of those organisms in Australia. So we are looking for tiny things, but I have to say that there are also lizards and giraffes. Giraffes too, but not in the desert. This is a side story and you know it. I'm not going there. And then nice tarantulas.
Awesome. I can't wait.
They're about as big as my hand, so I have pretty long hands. But there is a lot of life. You can. You also have cats, big cats, and you find llamas and alpacas, etc. So you have the full range of ecosystem, and they live in the Altiplano, not in the high Andes, but in the Altiplano, where we will have our base camp. And every single day you can meet them. And they will be next to you because they are not being hunted. They're also, how we call them, they are cousins of ostriches. And every single year when we go there, it's time for the babies to come out. So
Flamingos?
No, the flamingos are different. You have flamingos everywhere. 3 out of the 4 species are in the Andes.
Yeah.
They are the icy flamingos. The emus, they are cousins of ostriches.
Are the emus?
Yeah, and no, not emus. Nandus. I'm going to say it right. Nandus, and they are. It's time in spring for them to have their babies, so it's not rare to have them raised with our cars and see the little one right next to them. So there is abundant wildlife, but when you go higher, then all of a sudden, they disappear, and then you have to find life.
Yes, yes.
And the interesting thing is that, it looks desert, you see nothing around you, but as soon as you understand what the patterns are,
Yes.
you start finding them all over the place.
Right.
And it's not obvious, and I brought that rock on purpose here. This rock is very special, doesn't look like much, right?
Can we
I
bring
probably can show it to
camera
the
closer?
camera, and I don't know if Jasmine can probably show this rock. It doesn't look like much, and in fact it's a slice of a rock. This rock is very special, though. That's the very first fossil ever found using a rover. Unfortunately, that was not on Mars, but that was in the Atacama Desert, and that was in 2007 during the NOMAD field experiment. NOMAD was not really equipped to do a real science investigation, but it had a camera, and we had a science team. And we were looking, at the landscape remotely. The science team was at NASA Ames on the other side of the highway here, and NOMAD was in the desert in Chile. And so the science team saw a rock with a very geometrical feature on the surface. And so they decided that might be something that was proof that there was a fossil in the rock. So we decided to bring the rock back. The rock was brought back, and in fact, the nodule in question was nothing really that you could relate to a fossil.
Yes.
It was a piece of mineral. But we still sliced the rock. Actually, that was sample return, right?
So this is sliced like you'd slice bread in a way. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
We went through, we just got rid of the first layer, which is usually desert varnish, and so we sliced through the rock, and we analyzed that rock, and the little dark spots that you can see here is really what's interesting. We are talking about the cyanobacteria and all those things. These are actually records of very old algae.
Oh, wow.
So, in fact, we discovered life with a rover for all the wrong reasons. And that goes back to the philosophy on how do you search for life? How do you search for something you might not recognize?
Yes.
There are patterns to life. We can expect that there would be patterns for a life that is different. But in that case, we brought that rock completely for the wrong reason. And yet,
And there it is.
And there it is.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting lesson. It's a lesson that we learned 12 years ago now. So now we're trying to be a little smarter about that. And just, to tell the truth, NOMAD was absolutely not equipped for that. So it was just looking around with a camera.
Yeah.
So I keep that as a reminder of, become what you are looking for, because this is the only way you are going to understand how to find it.
Yeah. Good. Well, we have a lot of people from around the world watching: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Ireland, Atlanta, Albany, Hamburg, Norway. I'm just going to go down the list. Scotland, Belgium, Wollongong in Australia, Staines in the UK. Hi, Staines. Sweden, Bangladesh, and from Chile.
Wow.
Yeah. Charlotte, North Carolina, and Kurdistan. So that is almost the whole of our planet. That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about the expedition itself, the preparation for the expedition.
Next slide. Well, no, it starts really when the previous expedition stops, because then you come back, and if you are doing good science, you are coming back with more questions than you had answers, right? And lessons learned. The things that you don't want to do again, and that's a mistake that we repeat every single year. No, that happens too. But we do have a large team. We have a multidisciplinary team. So we do have engineers. We have ecologists, microbiologists, geologists, engineers I mentioned, roboticists, and we have drone pilots. We have a number of people who come together with different expertise.
We have some students.
And we will, we need to talk about the students too, because they play a very important role this year in the preparation of this expedition. So, baseline is that you have to bring together, you have to integrate people with different backgrounds. So it's a good thing that this team is experienced. It's a great mix of senior scientists and students that we are sort of, funneling through, so that they are. We have students that we had as grad students who are not young researcher and will become postdoc and continue on with us and become researcher on their own, but they transition through the whole thing. And it's a very comfortable place to be when you're a young researcher, because then you're learning the ropes, and so it makes it a little easier. So you have to integrate all this. You have to prepare the experiment, and basically what's happening in the field is almost like surgery. You have a goal. In fact, you have a series of goals. Each of these scientists has a personal goal that they want to achieve, but at the same time they are part of a team.
Yeah.
And so you have to integrate all this. You have to have a sequence of events. And because those guys are so professional, it's just like playing music. You see them in the field, and then we talk in the morning. We have the briefing in the morning in the tent. You will see this, Rebecca. We talk about what's going to happen, and then you go to the field and you make it happen. So obviously, sometimes you have the little glitch, etc. But this is where experience kicks in, really. In terms of preparation, that's a lot of equipment as well. And you've seen in the past few days the number of boxes.
A lot of boxes have been shipped out.
So I think that we will be close to 500 kilos, maybe more. I think something like that. They were around 30 boxes, which is not too bad. But big drills and pelican cases and drones
and that's just the science equipment. That doesn't include people's personal effects. It doesn't include all the tents and cooking equipment.
That is in Chile already. That is in Chile already, and I have a number of warehouses where we have 15 years of equipment over there. But certainly, it's something that you need to think through. You organize this through telecoms and video cons. We had the team here at the end of August, where we really started to write the script of what was going to happen. So it's certainly not something that you can, especially because of where we are. You have to use every single minute of it, and it's not a place where you can arrive unprepared. We arrive with a plan.
Yeah. Now, it's of course, if you're excited about what's going to happen in the Atacama Desert for the next month or so, as I am, we're very lucky this time that we have somebody who's going to tell us all about it. So if you are interested, Rebecca's going to tell us what you can look forward to in the next few months if you follow this expedition online.
Yeah, so obviously I want to tell the story about the work all the scientists are doing, what their goals are, help you get to know some of the scientists. This is an extremely diverse team. It's very international. There are people of all ages. There are lots of women and lots of men. There are students, and so I want to help tell those stories. But the other thing I think regular people, I'm not a scientist, regular people don't know is how do you do a science expedition? So, what are the experiments? Where do you eat? Where do you sleep? Where do you go to the bathroom? Things like that. Things people just don't know, and also some of the people that help us do that. Because as Nathalie said, we have a logistics team. So they are people who help us. They drive us places. They help us set up tents. They cook. They do a lot of the things that need to be done so that the scientists have time to do the science, but they play a really important role in the success of the expedition. And so I want to help tell those stories. Yeah.
And where, if you're looking for that, where is that going to be? Is it going to be on the SETI website?
It'll be on the SETI website at SETI.org. It will be on our social media. We'll probably do some videos like this, not live necessarily, but videos like this from Chile. And when we get back, perhaps we'll do another couple of conversations like this as well. So
all the great answers about where do you eat and where do you sleep and
know
everything
all,
else. Yes, everything else in between.
And for the young community out there on Facebook, I think it's going to be particularly interesting because we have Stanley with
Yes.
us this year.
Yes, so Stanley is an undergraduate student, and Natalie probably can give a little more detail, but Natalie and her team came up with an idea for a device, a weather sensor, basically, that they wanted to try and develop that ultimately perhaps could be used to detect microclimates or microhabitats on Mars. So they need to test it here on Earth. So these students worked with their advisors and with Natalie to develop this instrument that will deploy at the top of a volcano in Chile when we're there. And one of the students will be going with us.
Yes, and the story is completely amazing, and they were amazing. I was completely, struck by their determination, by their will.
Yeah.
I started discussing the project with John Hines, who is a former chief technologist of NASA Ames, and is a friend of mine too, and we reconnected, and he talked to me about his coordination and collaboration with the San Jose State University and the School of Engineering over there. And of course, the two of us together, we started talking about missions and Mars, and I told him about the ideas that I had, and especially this array of microenvironmental sensors. And he said it would be fun for, not only fun, but a good experience, a learning experience for the students to be involved at some level. I said, I have a little money to do that, so why don't they try to prepare an experiment, and this is what I'd like to have. But basically what I gave them was the idea, the concept, and I let them go with the design, because this is what they do, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And little by little, John came back and we started talking about it, and it started to take shape. And but we were really short on time because we started discussing this in June. Yeah. At the end of June. That's no time. And then there were periods of ups and downs, and they came 3 weeks ago to make a presentation here. There were still a few things to look at, and the day before we were supposed to have a deadline, because I had a strict deadline for shipping. They say we are not really sure, we still need to test a few things, and the next day I learned that they spent the whole night up just to make sure that they would be testing the system before it shipped. Otherwise, I told them, if it's not ready, it's not going, because it's not worth the resources, the time, etc. So the baseline is that they committed to something. They actually created a design around a scientific concept. They are part of a mission that they delivered on time, which actually earned Stanley, the lead of the team, a ticket to Chile. So Stanley is going to come with me, and if the weather agrees with us, and if the volcano next door is not too active, then Stanley will be seeing the Andes from 20,000 feet, because this is going to be the elevation we're going to deploy that thing.
I know, it's amazing.
That is such an amazing opportunity.
I
at
think
that stage in your career, so that is wonderful.
What
an inspiration to
it is
other
an inspiration, and this is why, if you are out there and you are interested in learning about science, just check very regularly on the SETI website and on Planetary Landscape, because Stanley will be there. And you also have experienced scientists who can tell you, what are the different steps, but at least Stanley will be able to give you his impression of being a young researcher, a young engineer, and being part of it. So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, and he was very excited when he came here. So.
Well, I know we're running a little bit short on that. We've got one question, so I'm just going to do this. This is from Ola. I'm not sure where you're from. We've got a lot of other people who have signed in, more people from Chile signing in, so they've obviously heard that you're on. So what is the main difference in looking for life in a dry desert landscape and an icy landscape? Besides the obvious water, is there anything else?
Well, water. Water is a big deal. Water is a big deal because when you have water, there are a number of things from the standpoint of metabolism that are happening, but also the type of adaptation that you need. It's a different environment. It's a different type of life. An algae in water at high latitude doesn't need to protect itself like an algae, the same algae, in this environment in the desert where the pond is going to be temporary, episodical during the year and under really high stress from the radiation standpoint. But what we see, over and over and over again is that fundamentally these are the same organisms. And we see this in the Atacama.
Yeah.
What I like about the Atacama Altiplano in the Andes is that it's what we call a space for time substitution experiment, where as you go up, you go in different stages of time, on Mars. And it's wetter or drier depending which direction that you are going. But what we see is that we find exactly the same time of organism, of bacteria, in all those places. But they adapted, to the different situations and the different environments. So that tells us about, the resilience of life, but also how we came to this. And remember that life on Earth was basically just very simple until 500, 700 million years ago. So we have to thank them for their resilience and their adaptability for being here today.
Yeah. And hopefully, similarly, the resilience of the Martians, the bacterial
Hopefully, Well, and the good thing is that they are easy.
This.
I always joke that what makes those cyanobacteria, those blue and green algae, is extremely simple stuff that is so common in the universe. So my take on this is that the universe is populated by cyanobacteria, and we're going to find them all over the place. I have no doubt about this, that we should be able to recognize cyanobacteria fairly commonly. Complex life is a different matter.
So the universe could be teeming with cyanobacteria. So that's
my story, and I'll stick to it.
Okay.
But I just wanted to say a last thing, Simon, before you you finish, is that this is our logo for this year, our patch for the expedition, and you will see it on the SETI website and on Planetary Landscapes. So make sure to follow Rebecca and others. All the stories that we are going to tell you, we are going to try to update you as often as we can. And I'll see if I can produce a little bit more, but if you're interested, just let me know.
Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to the story as it unfolds in the next few weeks.
The first one will be probably the equipment.
Will it arrive on time?
Will it arrive on time? Thank you very much, Simon.
Okay, of course.
Thank you, Simon.